Okay, we left off having made our first template right here. We're going to make some additional changes to that. And at this point, what I want to do is make a copy of this template so that if anything goes wrong, we don't lose anything. We can always go back to the original template. So there are two ways to do that. I can go to Create Template. I can go to Create from Existing Template. And I can select the Saved tab. I can then navigate over to where we saved it. And here it is. And I can click that and select that. That would be one way. A simple way is to simply go over here to where this little down arrow is and click that. And I'm going to duplicate it. Make sure you don't click delete. Okay, so I want to duplicate it. Okay, so it will automatically append a date number to the file name that we started with. This can be anything that you want, so I'm going to change this to template demo 2, and it will save in the same folder. So I'll save that. Okay, now let's open it. Okay, so I'm going to begin by removing the content that we have in there, and we save these as separate blocks so we can always go back to them. I'll delete that. I'll delete the button, and I'll delete that. And here we are where we started from. Now, you remember when we started, we reviewed these empty templates that Marketing Cloud gives you as starting points. And we started with this one, the plain blank template. We noted that this template here has a number of rows in it. This row here is split into two. We took another look over here at this theme template, and we noted that the content regions were identified with labels when we moused over them. So there was a header region, content 1 and content 2, and so on. And when we looked at the HTML code for that template, we found this. We found the table that holds the placeholder divs, the data type slot divs. This table has a number of table rows and table data tags. And so this was the header placeholder div, and then there was the content 1, content 2, and so on. So we're going to recreate this in our template now. So let's go back over here and let's look at the code view. And we're going to scroll down, and here is that table that holds the placeholder divs, and here's our one placeholder div. So I'm going to start by just changing the data key name. Right now it says banner. I'm simply going to call this content. Okay. To help see the table rows a little easier, I'm going to put some space around them, and I'm going to put comments around them. Okay, so now we have this separated out. Now if I simply copy and paste this in, what will happen is we'll be pasting in the same data key name twice, and that will blow our template. That's not good. We'll basically have to start over again if we do that. So the safe way to copy this entire table row is like this. We'll go up here to these tools, and this tool here is Insert Code Snippet. So let's click here, and we see that there are some pre-built code snippets. One of them is content area. If you use this, you will only get the placeholder div, but you won't get the table row. And we want the table row and the placeholder div. So what we're going to do is click Create New Snippet. And we're going to save this little chunk of code with the table row as our own code snippet. So we're going to call this, let's see, content row. And by default, it'll just dump it in the top of our root directory. So we're going to change that and navigate to our template demos folder. Okay, and now we're going to save. And now we can take a quick look at it here. And here it is. This is what we saw before, and that looks correct. So here we are. So now I want to insert that snippet right here. So I'm going to go back to Insert Code Snippet. And under Save Snippets, it's not showing any right now because it's actually looking at our root directory. So you use the folder icon here, and then you navigate over to where we put the snippet. There it is. Okay, now let's take a look at what it did. You can see the two regions now over here. This is the first region that we started with is this one now. It dropped the new one on top. And this one has the data key name of content. This one here, it's reassigned a data key name. It's given it an arbitrary number to differentiate it from the first one. It's also added a few other attributes onto this div, and we're going to leave those alone for now. So right now we're just going to add another one, another row. So we're going to do the same thing. And it did the same thing. It put it on top, and it gave it a different data key name up here. And here are our 3 rows. So let's go back here. Now, this label that's here is only showing because we haven't actually entered a label for it. So if we go here to Properties, this is the placeholder label. We're going to change that to header. You see you can also set a limit as to how many blocks you can put in these regions. You can also specify which kinds of blocks can go in these regions. So we're going to allow everything for now. There's no reason to winnow this down. So I'm going to click OK. If we mouse over on this, we see that it now says header. So let's do the same thing here. I'm going to call this main content. And now that appears. And let's go down here and do this one. Footer. Okay. Now, we could also click on Properties again. These also have settings just like the blocks do. So you can space these apart. You can add margin space here or padding space, either way, to push these apart from one another. I'm going to leave it at all zeros right now. Okay, let's add some content now. In my saved blocks folder, I've added a few additional blocks. So I'm going to start with a heading block, and I'm using the H1 font for this. And in our main content, let's click done here. Our main content, I'm going to put this intro paragraph. Okay. And then in our footer region, we're going to add the footer message. Okay, and this is how it looks when you get started. It'll be all pushed together, but we're going to space those apart later. I also want to add an image up at the top. So to do that, I'm going to drag in an image block from the standard blocks over here. We'll put that up top. And from here, I can browse to an image in my local files. And I'm going to choose this one. And you choose Upload and Publish. And there it is. Now, in our preview window, we are seeing the image being sized down to the space that's allowed for it. However, the image block controls here automatically pick up the actual size of the image, which is too big. So in Outlook on Windows, what will happen is if we leave it set this way at 920, the image will actually fill out the width of 920 pixels, and it will push open the main tables that make up the email, and basically will break our layout. So we don't want that. So what we have to do is change this to the correct size. So what is the correct size? Well, we know that our page is 600 pixels wide, okay? And we added 24 pixels of margin space on either side of that, so that's 48. So 600 minus 48 is 552. So let's go back here. What we're going to do is we're going to change this to 552. The height will automatically adapt to that when you have this lock icon turned on. So you don't have to worry about figuring out the height. It's the width that's important, because the width is what will break the layout in Outlook. Now in this case, since it's a very large image, we do not need to have scale to fit turned on. We can turn that off. We should put some alt text of some kind here. We're not going to add image padding or border or any of that. In this case, we're not going to add a link to it, but you can see that that's available down here. So now we have it sized correctly, and it won't break in Outlook, which is good. We still have our footer region is stacked right up against our main content region. What we'll do is we'll edit the properties for the main content region itself. And we'll go to settings, and let's add some bottom margin space to this. So I'm going to click down here. I'm going to uncheck the lock icon, and let's add some bottom margin space of 20 pixels. And then when we click done, we see that it pushes down the footer. Of course, you can adjust that to however you need to for your design. Now, the footer has the same text size as the little intro paragraph up here, because it's picking up the default body font style. So in order to change that, what we can do is we can go here to size, and we know that our body size is 16, so let's make that 14. We also see that when we change it to 14, the extra line height that we added to our body text now looks a little too spacey over here in the footer. So over here is the line height control, and single line height is a little too tight, but the in between 1.15 is just about right. So we can leave it there. We can also center it if we want. I think having the little trailing text there is a little awkward looking, so we'll just change that. Okay, so now we have this information in our footer. If you go down here to social media, we can add in some social sharing buttons, and this is another type of block. There's social follow, and the social follow will let you change the URL to what it needs to be. You see, you can also change the style. Let's just choose gray in this case. You see it sets the font over here, so we'll need to change that to keep it consistent with what we're using, which is Verdana. We'll leave it small. The color is okay. Could still use a little bit of space here. So we could add space to the social sharing block itself. That would be one way to do it. Uncheck that. Let's add a little space to the top. And that'll push that down. Now, if this still looks a little too large, we can go back and make it a little smaller again. That is a little smaller now than the text that's in the social sharing buttons. So let's split the difference and make it 13. Okay. Now, it would be helpful to have a dividing line between the footer and the main content area so that it's clear that this is the footer area when you're looking at your email. So we could go here to our footer area properties, go to settings, and we can add a border to the top of this. Uncheck that, put a border of 1, and there it is. So there's a border on the top. We need some space underneath that border though. Okay, so let's go back here. So what we're going to want to add here is padding space in this case. If we add margin space, then it just pushes the whole thing down further, which isn't what we want. So let's go back. You can just clear that. We want padding space. Uncheck that. Put that into place. And now we have some space between here. Now we can change the color of the border also. It doesn't have to be black. We could use our border color that we established earlier. There. So now it matches the border that goes around the page. So now we have the basis for our newsletter. One thing that I'll point out here is there's quite a bit of space underneath the welcome, which is an H2 heading. And one of the things that Marketing Cloud doesn't do is it doesn't add margin space to the top and bottom of your headings. Okay, so if we went back and looked at our design settings, and let's look at the H2, there's line height, weight, style, color, size, but there's no margin space. So in order to adjust how much margin space is underneath our heading here, our heading 2, you really have to add that in manually. You don't have to, but it would help improve this a little bit. Margin bottom. Now you can use pixel sizes, and there are HTML developers out there who will tell you that when you're working on an email that you should always use pixel sizes. However, I have found that M's work perfectly well. So how much is an M? An M is a relative unit that's based on the font size. So we know that our H2 font is 30 pixels, and when we say use half an M, we're saying make the bottom margin half the font size. And so now these two things fit closer together. You can also adjust the top and bottom margins that are on our heading up here if you wanted to. But that's basically all we need to do for now. Now let me just save this, and aha! One or more content area data key names contain a reserved word, content. So you'll recall that when we went back into our template and we changed the heading to, let's see, we changed the footer to have a data key name of content. Well, it doesn't like that. So Since this is in the footer, let's just change this to footer. And now we'll go back. Let me close that. Let's try and save it again. And now it's saved successfully. Okay, so this is our basic newsletter. You can certainly do a lot more with it, and we will as we go on with this video series. But the thing here now is we have some sample content entered in our template, but we can't actually send a test email from the template. What you have to do is make a newsletter message, an email message from this template, and then you can send a test message that way. So we're going to close this. I'm going to create a new email message. And we're going to navigate over to our, let's see, here we go, to our saved templates. And here it is here, template demo 2. And we see that the other templates are here also that are in our root directory. If we need to narrow this down to find the template that we want, we simply go here and target it to just our folder that we set up previously. So I'm going to select that and select that. Now you must give it a name. So in this case, I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to call it test. Let me make that big so that we can see it. It's going to save it in my template demos, which is fine. I'm going to click next. Now also, before you can actually send an email, let me close this for a second. Before you can send an email, you must have a subject line. Okay, I'm going to do this same thing here for our subject line. And now we can actually send this email. You can also add a pre-header. We'll cover that in a later video, not right now. Now, let me just go back to the code view. We saw that briefly. You notice that this time the code view has a lock on it. Okay, we can look at the code and we can select it and we can copy it, but we can't actually make any changes to it at all. Now down here, those placeholder divs that had the data key name, those have been swapped out now. So here in our first row, we had our TD class, responsive TD, and now that placeholder div has been swapped out with a new table, which is generated by the blocks. So every block has a different kind of table set up to contain the content, and this is all highlighted in yellow. But we can't change anything here. I can try and type, but nothing is happening. So if we do need to go back and make changes to the CSS in the head of our page, we can't do that here from the email. We have to go back to the original template and then reapply the template to our email again. And we'll do that later. So let's go back here. I'm going to click next. Here, when you get to this preview panel, this is the last stage of our email message before it goes out. And all the final changes to the HTML that go into this email only show up here in this preview panel. And in our next video, I'm going to show you an alternate way to make this template, to set this template up. And we're going to actually make use of this when we get there. So right now I'm in the desktop view. We can also double check our mobile view while we're here. Okay. And we see that it is adding some additional footer information down here. Let's go back here. There's a view as web page link here. So now we need to send our test email. and we send a test, and if all goes well, you'll get a confirmation. Good, successfully sent, and we'll get the email. Let me just go over a couple of things that I kind of glossed over very quickly. We set a bottom margin space on the bottom of the heading H2 tag. Why is that important? Well, when you're looking at HTML in a web browsers have become very standardized over the years, and they're very good at figuring out what the margin space should be around text elements such as heading tags, paragraph tags, and so on. However, there's a lot of variation in email clients. In particular, webmail. Webmail such as Google Mail, Yahoo Mail, Microsoft Mail, those things all rewrite all of your HTML and CSS, and they namespace it. And that's to keep your styles for your newsletter or email separate from the styles that actually style the entire interface that the webmail system uses. And those can often write over margin spaces on heading tags and paragraph tags as well. So if you don't set them in your HTML, in your newsletter, what can happen is you can get very different spacing between things when you view your email in a webmail client. So to be more consistent, I added that little bit of margin space there. The other thing is we changed the amount of space between the main content region or content area and the footer. So we made adjustments to that. Here in properties, we added margin space on the bottom. So this little widget that has the margin on the outside and padding on the inside, this is basically following the HTML box model. If you don't know what that is, you can Google for it. And basically, it looks like this. Let's see a whole bunch of them. Here's a whole bunch of them. If I click on this one, the HTML box model property basically is you have content in the middle, whatever that content is. In this case, it's text or other content. And you have an outer border around that content. So the border property, you can actually add a border, which we've done a number of times now. And then there's space in between the border and the content, and that is the padding space represented here. And then there is additional space that's outside of the border, and that is margin space, which is out here. Now, we know that in our HTML template, it's actually made up of a bunch of tables, and you should know that you can't actually add margin space into table cells. You can add padding space, but not margin space. So how is Marketing Cloud doing this little trick? Well, what it's doing is all of your container blocks and regions have some wrapping tables. And the outer wrapping table gets padding space, which they're calling margin, and the inner wrapping table gets padding space that they're calling padding. So exactly how they're doing this isn't so important. What matters is that you do have these two kinds of spaces available. So here we added some margin on the bottom. We then added over here in the footer region, we added padding space in order to push it away from the border that we added. Now we could have added the border to the bottom of the main content column. It doesn't really matter where you add it. You have to decide how you want to do this, and where you want to place your borders and your extra spacing. But this is how you space blocks and regions apart in Marketing Cloud. You use this little HTML box model widget. It shows up in a lot of different places. It also shows up in the blocks. So if we go to block settings, here we are again, and we added a little bit of margin space on the top of our social sharing block here. So it shows up on blocks, also on the content areas or regions. It also shows up in layout blocks, which we haven't started to use yet, but we will. The same little box model widget is available to you in all of these places. And they all work fine except for this one. Now, we place this big image up here, and I want to alert you to this. This has padding space only around the image. All web browsers will allow you to add padding space around an image. However, Microsoft Outlook on Windows does not allow padding on images. So if we wanted to space this image apart from other content by adding padding to it, what Marketing Cloud will do here in the image block settings is it will add padding directly onto the image tag, and Microsoft Outlook will not allow that. So you'll see the change here. So for instance, if I add a bunch of padding here, we see that this happens, and it looks like there's extra space around the image, but that space will go away in Outlook. We won't actually get that space at all. What you have to do if you want to add spacing around an image block, what you have to do instead is don't add image padding here, but go up to the block settings. Here, margin and padding space is added to the wrapping tables that Marketing Cloud generates around the image tag. So here, it's perfectly acceptable to add padding space, and Microsoft Outlook will go along with that just fine, no problem. But if you add it here, you'll have a problem. So by rights, this tool should not be made available here in the image block here in Marketing Cloud. So I just wanted to point that out to you, and I'll show you some other areas where this impacts images as we go on with a series of videos.